did my time. I paid for my crime.
I want to wish each and every single one of you an absolutely splendid good evening, no matter what part of the world you may be. We do have a very special show lined up for you today. It's another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
I paid for my crime.
Along with your host, that's me, Kervin, Julien, as per usual.
For my crime.
Once again, no David Romania, I'm afraid. He sends his deepest apologies, but he can't be with us tonight. And we do look forward to seeing him again very soon and hope he gets better.
Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die.
But we're not going to be pulling any punches on this show.
In school, I learned my lessons.
We have a prestige guest by the name of Ian Tilling.
I was good with my hands.
And we're going live to Bucharest.
Women, I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet.
Theme of today's show, homeless in Romania.
Game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun.
Just to let you know that there are some changes going on in the background.
Life is too short to spin it all.
It's with great sadness that we also say goodbye to my previous producer, Teresa.
I paid for my crime.
She's just stepped down last week.
I paid for my crime.
Well, there is a new producer about to step in. And we'll be introducing her sometime in April. So in the meantime, you're going to have to deal with just me, I'm afraid. But apart from that, we wish Teresa all the best in everything that she does, in all her endeavours.
I was a drug dealer so much.
And we hope that these things that she's going through is just for a season and will pass.
Story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
Now, most of you that know me knows that I've got a history of working in homelessness.
I wouldn't do it again. I was
supporting drug addicts and alcohol dependents.
Real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's.
Some of the misfits and people who've forgotten.
I was the real Terminator.
The discarded, the unloved, the unwanted, and the broken.
Spit you out like a real alligator.
Because you know my philosophy. You know my principle. Everybody matters.
Now he could be facing life in prison.
And my guest today is someone who has trodden a very similar path, if not better and for longer, and has had some huge successes. And we're going to get to hear about the journey of Ian Tilling and his quest for the homeless in Romania. So stand by, we'll be back with you in a short while.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track.
Please remember, 8th of April.
Like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen.
We are going back to Romania. My dear friend Mike Ormsby.
There was not a man I could.
Susie Howe.
I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet.
And the subject of the matter will be Witch Child, which comes off the back of the book he wrote, which is called Child Witch. You catch my little anecdote there?
Don't need no gun in my hand.
And that's the story of how children,
it's too short to spend it all in jail.
Very young children,
cope with this living hell,
whose poverty-stricken families can no longer afford to keep them, have them churned out and labelled as child witches or children of sorcery in order to ease the burden.
Did my time. I paid for my crime.
Shameful sometimes.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
But we're going to hear a lot more about that on the 8th of April, so please stand by and look out for all the shows that we've got yet to come. On the 15th of April, we've got Taylor Neville on a program called Who Speaks for Me?
I had to repent.
Pipeline prison service in America, imprisoning innocent people, fast tracking them to a life of institutionalized jail. Yeah, we're going to be doing that too. We've got so much more to come on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio, so please hang fire, hang tight. And just remember, keep it locked.
Already did my time. Paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
So we have 2 hours of talk.
Trying to cope with this living hell.
With me, your host, and our guest, Ian Tilling.
Trying to cope with this living.
And don't forget, you can join us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
Trying to cope with this living hell.
Click on that click here button. That will take you into the live session. Sign into the chat room.
Already did my time.
Familiarize yourself with the World Jam Global Radio family.
Our Father who art in heaven.
Alternatively, you can get us on an app called TuneIn,
Thy kingdom come.
available on all smartphones and received in every country around the world.
Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us
This is World Jam Global Radio.
but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity. This is clarity.
Okay, without any further ado, let me just give you a slight introduction. Ian Tilling visited Romania in 1990 to 1991 before settling in 1992. A retired UK police officer, Ian founded Casa Iona, which manages shelters for homeless families and single women. Casa Iona aims at getting children into school and parents into work before moving into their own accommodation. Ian is married and has 4 children from a previous marriage, and at this present moment in time is doing some absolutely tremendous work working with the homeless in Romania. Ian Tilling, are you with us?
Hello, yes, good evening, Kervin.
How are you, Ian? And first, tell us a little bit about yourself here in the UK first, because obviously a British police officer, detective. What was your work here, and what was that like?
Oh, it was an amazing career, really. I joined the Metropolitan Police Cadets scheme at the beginning, back in 1963. Wow. And then joined the regular police in the metropolitan area in 1969, before transferring to Kent Constabulary in 1972, and there I remained. Although I did work with the regional crime squad as well, so it was a fair amount of travelling as well.
And how many years in total did you actually work as a police
So
officer?
27 in the end, yes.
27 years in total.
Yeah.
And what was the pluses, the stuff that you really take away from the work that you did as a police detective?
Interesting question. A whole mixture of things, really. I mean, it was very exciting at the fighting edge, if you like, of crime. In my day, there was a much bigger concentration on violent crime, particularly armed robberies. That, of course, has changed over the years. But it wasn't only just arresting the criminals, but it was also trying to help the victims of crime, and trying to support witnesses as well, who quite often had to appear in court and give their evidence in quite some frightening times.
And when you talk about armed robberies and that sort of stuff back then, it was a lot different back then, wasn't it? Because police weren't actually readily armed back then, were they?
No, not at all. In fact, it was quite rare to be armed. I mean, designated officers who had specific training were armed, but only on specific cases or specific instances, rather. So, yeah, I mean, you might be qualified as a firearms weapons officer, but I mean, it would still be quite rare to carry a gun.
And so, therefore, 9 times out of 10, you're going out to go and deal with respond to an armed robbery, etc., with the possibility of you actually encountering somebody who's armed while you're not.
Yeah, I mean, on those specific operations, when I mean, if it was down to surveillance or we kind of knew that something was going to go down, then we were armed appropriately, yeah. So on the occasions, I mean, there were a few occasions where the intelligence was somewhat wrong, and something happened quite unexpectedly. So it was then a question of having to respond the best way you could.
So that's a plus. What about the minuses? What are the things that you would say? You know, these are the things that I probably would have preferred never to have experienced.
Yeah. I mean the distress of victims of crime, particularly those of a violent or sexual nature, was very draining. And postmortems. I mean, I can't begin to imagine how many postmortems I've actually been to now. But I mean, I suppose in many respects I found it quite interesting with adults. I mean, but when you have to attend postmortems of babies and young children through Copley syndrome and so on, they were very, very difficult.
Wow. So 27 odd years as a police officer, going through various types of experiences, highs and lows, adrenaline pumping sessions to heart pounding, infuriating encounters where you probably felt like you'd like to throttle the culprits, having to be disciplined. And then, to top that all, you finish your career, or you're finishing your career. What brought Romania to mind? I mean, here you are in the UK, in the middle of a reasonably successful career, 27 odd years as a standing officer in the UK. It's probably, you know, a time where most people have said to themselves, "Well, I've done my bit. Time for me to get my bungalow and I don't know, go and retire in Felixstowe or Sittingbourne or Torquay somewhere, you know, by the seaside and." You know, eke my life away until it's over. But you chose to go to Romania. Why?
Well, originally it was from the media pictures that were coming out of Romania in the early part of 1990, so shortly after the so-called revolution.
Right.
And, I mean, the media pictures just showed children and young people just languishing in these so-called orphanages. And I was at that time also running a charity called Kent Children's Across. And what we were doing was taking 6 policemen from Kent and 6 Kent police officers and a doctor, and we were going on a holiday of a lifetime, taking with us 8 children with terminal or progressive illness. And we had just come back from one of those holidays when my wife kind of mentioned these pictures that were coming out of Romania and said, "Why don't you go over there and see if you can help?" And it was quite extraordinary, really, because there'd been a woman from Ashford who had driven over with others and helped, but in the centre of the country in a place called Brasov. So I spoke with her. And together with the head nurse from the Children's Holiday charity, we borrowed a van from a local builder, filled it full of medical equipment and various other things, and quite naively just jumped in it and drove all the way to Bucharest in Romania. It was quite an extraordinary journey. I mean, it was at that time non-stop, so we shared the driving. But as soon as we entered into what was formerly the Eastern Bloc, so I mean our first encounter was, I think it was Czechoslovakia, and before we went Czech Republic, and it just changed. Everything changed. People viewed us still with a great deal of suspicion. We obviously stood out as tourists. We had blue jeans, and nobody in the East had blue jeans in those days, or very few. So we did kind of stand out like a sore thumb. But we made our way to the Romanian border and eventually drove all the way to Bucharest, found ourselves parked outside a hotel and stayed there the night. And then literally went to, I think it was Mother Teresa's orphanage we went to first. She had already been here and set one up. So we visited her, and I spent a couple of days working with her. And then, quite perchance, we happened to meet a small group of British nurses who were from an organisation which eventually became the Romanian Angel Appeal, which is George Harrison's wife's charity that she set up. And we moved in with them into what they called a home hospital in a place called Plătărești, which was about a 40-minute drive outside of Bucharest. And it was awful, absolutely awful. All the children were labelled as irrecuperables, i.e. children that couldn't be, that as far as the state was concerned, couldn't be recovered. And I was tasked with looking after 20 children in one room with 10 cots on each side, all with vertical bars. And yeah, I mean, the image of little prison cells instinctively came to mind. But I mean, these children were aged between about 8 and 9 years of age, still being bottle fed, and had never ever left their cots. So you can understand where the term irrecuperable came from. Yeah. So it was just shocking, absolutely shocking.
So that's the first impression that you had when you got there. At that point, had you actually decided that you were going to be staying, or was this still just a passing through visit?
No, in fact, we stayed a month. I took a month leave from the police. And when we drove back, that was it. I mean, we wanted to get out of Eastern Europe, as it was, we called it then. And we literally drove all the way to Vienna before stopping and finding a place to stay there. And we were quite determined not to come back again. I mean, it was as if our soul had been kind of sucked out of our very being.
So, I mean, you're a hardened police officer. You've seen some stuff in your life in the 27 years that you operated as a detective in the police force. You'd seen some stuff, some terrible stuff in your life. What was so different about this that you had seen?
It was just absolutely stark. I mean, here you have children who the system had actually broken. I mean, the health system itself had broken these children. So the situation was that children were being abandoned by families who could not afford to keep them. But under the old regime, the Ceausescu regime, women were encouraged to have as many children as possible. And birth control was banned, abortions were banned. So they were just kind of producing children to kind of help Ceausescu's vision of having this big industrial nation in Europe.
But they couldn't afford to keep these children.
No, I mean, no, absolutely not. So the next best thing was to give them into state care, where they thought their children were going to be cared. But what happened was that for the first 3 years of their life, they remained in the maternity hospitals. So you can imagine, I mean, there were so many babies being abandoned in these maternity hospitals, and very, very few staff, and particularly trained staff. So the children weren't being looked after. They weren't being stimulated as they would be normally. So many just languished.
So you say that sort of like ripped the soul out of you.
Absolutely right. So, I mean, I had no intentions of ever going back. But Romania is a peculiar country in as much as the following morning when we woke up in Vienna and we started walking around, it was like a magnetic pull. So we were really being pulled back to go back to Romania. And it was a very, very strange feeling. So, yeah, I knew that we would go back. It was trying to think then what we would have to do, or what was in the best interests of the people we were working with in Plătărești, as to what we would do next. But sorry.
You keep talking about we. Are you talking about you and your wife?
No, this is with the head nurse. So
Right.
I mean, the thing there was, we were thinking of doing a reasonably long-term project, but we didn't know what. So we knew it would be with the children in this particular institution. And by that stage, the Romanian Angel Appeal was getting quite well established. So we were working alongside them and a Dutch organisation, which was also working there. So between us, collectively, we were looking at moving these children on, which ultimately we did.
Okay, so you left. You was on your way to Vienna with no plans of coming back, and then you felt this pull, this draw, pulling you back to Romania.
Sure.
At this time, did you have an inkling, an idea of what it was that you could do to contribute to the betterment of what you saw taking place, that had startled you and shocked you so much?
Yeah, not at that stage. So what I really wanted to do was to kind of provide some material aid to the institution that we were working with. So when I went back to my hometown in Folkestone, I got in touch with the local regional newspaper, and they were very supportive. And we then decided to say, okay, let's see how many people we can get to join us and make a convoy, and we can all drive to Romania. And then depending on how much we collected, what we collected, then we could see what we could do to distribute that around the country. And it was a phenomenal success. So within a few months, we had 100 vehicles, 300 people, and we raised about, in value of aid and everything else, about £250,000. Now, because of my connection with the police here in the UK, we had contact with the Ministry of the Interior, who really became our mentor at the end of the day. So they were the ones who were looking after us and making sure everything worked. So when we told them about the convoy, they helped us choose various institutions around the country, and they gave us an escort when we arrived at the border to the various things. So what was good about that, besides the aid itself, was the fact that each of these groups, we split them into groups of 10. So we had 10 groups of 10. And they were all in allocated an institution which we hoped that they would stay with after they left and support their institution after they'd all gone back home. And largely that happened. So that was very successful. Whether all the material aid reached where it should have gone is doubtful. We were very naive back in those days. So, but if the truth be known, I mean, the poverty in Romania was stark. So we had, to try and understand and put it in some sort of context, so we were looking after this institution in Plătărești, and it was largely staffed by the women who lived in the village. It was their sole employment, and they had children at home as well. And here are these children called irrecuperables, and we were bringing in beautiful toys and everything else, and their children back at home had nothing. So with a member of staff who's looking at these children and been working with these children and young people as irrecuperables, i.e., you know, they're languishing, why should they have a very nice toy and their child at home go without? So there were lots of difficult getting your head round moments. I mean, it was easy to get angry, but it was also easy to kind of look beyond that and look at the situation and the circumstances.
You also, apart from working with these children, you had 4 children of your own, right?
Yes, yeah.
And right in the midst of all of this going on for you, you lost your eldest son.
Yes, tragically, a few days after his 19th birthday, and I think it was something like 2 weeks before Christmas. So this was in 1991. I had already at that time said, okay, I want to do a project in Romania. I was coming up to retirement and looking around for something to do. I knew what I didn't want to do, and that was to do anything in relation to security. I just wanted to turn my back on that life and do something completely different. But I had absolutely no idea what it was that I wanted to do. Absolutely none. So the Romanian thing came up. So we'd already...
Just before you carry on, though, carry on, Ian, most people, having gone through what you've been through, worked what you've worked, right and ready for retirement, and then you have this big upheaval where you lose your son.
Sure.
You've got to retirement age. You would have normally had a healthy pension because
Sure.
working for the Crown, etc. Why didn't you just choose to just go and sit your life out and just relax and try? Why not take?
Yeah, it was interesting because at that stage, the Romanian government had made available a small apartment block to the charity I'd set up, and the idea was to turn that building into foster care homes for children, some of the children and young people in this institution. So the plans had progressed quite advanced by that stage. And a few months before I was due to leave and to start work here, the tragedy hit my family. So, yeah, there was a lot of soul searching, and I sat down with my wife and my remaining children to talk it through. And they were supportive of my decision. I didn't know it at that time, but clearly, when I look back on life over the years, clearly I was using the opportunity to run away from all the hurt and to leave that behind me, and to try and find some sense of it all.
I think we can all kind of relate to that somehow. In part of this interview you were giving, there's a sentence that you say that's quite intriguing. You say, "It was all unraveling and my personal demons were coming to the front as I was having to deal with that too." What did you mean by your personal demons coming to the front?
So it was... So, I mean, just to fill in a little bit of background here. So we were given the block, we moved into this block of apartment block, which should have been empty at the time, which wasn't. So there were about 20 odd families still living in it. So it was a long drawn out progress to get them into alternative accommodation and so on. The whole project was unraveling quite fast at that stage. The Romanian government pretty well broke all its promises on everything. Nobody was signing any papers, so we couldn't progress with the project much further. And in the end, in the winter or the autumn rather of '94, it was clear that the project was not going to go. So I went back to the UK, spoke with my trustees, who effectively said that the project's over, kill it. So I came back to Romania really with the intention of closing the project. But I'd been so kind of impressed with the Romanian people I'd been working with and some of the other British expats over here who really encouraged me to make it into a Romanian project and start all over again, which I did. But before that happened, before that decision happened, I kind of had a breakdown myself. So I ended up living in a Romanian ghetto with 300 Roma families, which is where this building was, incidentally. So they knew me very well. It was a no-go area. I mean, just nobody went there at all. It was very, very run down, as you can imagine. But I was, in many respects, wholly accepted by them. I was known as the mad Englishman, Ingleser Nebun, which I kind of carried that tag along with me all these years. But they kind of respected me and kind of looked after me to a certain extent. But my life had pretty well unravelled by that stage, so I was really getting out of bed, drinking myself to death with cheap booze, and really had no future, no hope, no opportunities that I could see it. My marriage had finally unravelled back in the UK, so I lost pretty well all I had in the UK as well. So I was broke, and everything came on top. And it was going through that process where you had to deal with everything. I mean, you had to look at, for the first time ever, I actually started to go through the grieving process with my son. So up until that time, I'd never mentioned his name. It was just like trying to expel everything out of your mind. And I sat down and dealt with that. And I dealt with the grieving process, got myself through that, and all the other things. And in that process, it was as if I had discovered this new entity who I hadn't recognised before, and who was really quite different to the entity he had been before he had gone through this process. And I liked me. I kind of liked the person I was. And with the help of a woman who had been working with me in the past, called Christina, she had been my assistant and then left to go and join another organisation. But she knew where I was, and we had become friends, and I had become friends with her parents as well. And she kind of kept bringing me out of this ghetto, taking me back to her place and getting her parents to feed me. And slowly it was kind of getting back together again. So then Christina dropped a bombshell, totally unexpectedly. I mean, we had had a disastrous meeting with the Ministry of the Interior, so we knew the project was over completely, so we had to rethink the whole thing. But she announced that she was getting married to her boyfriend, who I knew, and would I go to the wedding, which was 3 months hence. And of course I said, yes, fine, yes, I'd like to do that. But when I went back to my little ghetto, I kind of realised I had feelings for her. So I borrowed some money, took her out for a meal, and kind of told her how I felt. And to my amazement, she said, well, you have 3 months in which to prove it. So that was it. So, I mean, we had 8 boxes, so I managed to find suits and trousers and shirts and stuff like that. I started knocking on local businesses, particularly the British businesses that were in Bucharest at the time, and asking for support for this project, and found it. And slowly and surely I found my feet, and that was it. I mean, I was away.
Well, you was away, but how did things pan out with you and Christina?
Well, we eventually got married, so she didn't marry Eddie in the end.
Wow. That's just an amazing story right there on itself. They could just make up. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. So inspiring and encouraging. So yeah, I'm already feeling that joy for you, sharing that with you, even in this moment. So, so here you are now. You was almost at your lowest ebb. Things slipping away very fast, and just when you think that you couldn't get kicked any lower, she throws this bombshell at you. But
yep.
So where did you find the courage to actually tell her how you felt?
Well, it was difficult in the sense of, I mean, she was 17.
Sorry to cut you, but didn't you think that was being a bit selfish, bearing in mind that she's just told you she was about to get married to a sweetheart?
Well, no, actually, no. I mean, I didn't expect anything to come from it. I was convinced that, I mean, she would get married and that would be it. But it came to the point where I thought, look, if I do not tell her how I feel, then I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life. I'm not going to know what's going to happen. So I had to do it. But the other thing with it was that I didn't expect her to agree. And it was almost like an out-of-body experience when I asked her. I mean, it was like somebody else was uttering the words out of my mouth. So yeah, I mean, it was superb that she was changed her mind, and fantastic. I mean, it's been
did she during that meeting let you know that the feelings were mutual?
No. So all she said was she got 3 months in which to prove it. So being an aspiring poet, I wrote many, many love letters, and obviously that did the trick in the end.
Wow. So what did the boyfriend make of all this?
Well, Addy was a little bit disappointed, but he understood, I think. So I wouldn't say that the relationship was 100% between them, but I mean, I wouldn't know. So I guess probably there were reasons anyway.
I hear that. Right, okay. Go on. Go on. What was you going to say then?
I said she got the better man.
Yeah. Well, I'll agree with that. So here you are now, and so in order to win her heart, you've started knocking on doors, and you've got the project alive again.
Yep.
Okay, so what was your next move? Once you've got the project alive, forget about... we can talk about Christina a bit later on, but now that you've got the project alive, how much of that... In fact, let's bring Christina back into it. How much of that was you getting excited over how your relationship with Christina was developing, as well as your input and contribution into bringing this project around?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was on, I had a new lease of life, obviously. But it was, we kind of sat down and thought about what we could do with the building. So we had this building, which we'd been given, and we needed to completely renovate it. And we knew that at that time we didn't have real projects that we could get funding for. So what we decided to do was set up what we called a resource centre. So we'd invite other local NGOs or charities to come in and set up their projects in this building, because in order to have a project, you had to have a space, and spaces in building spaces were very, very rare to find. So we could help them that way. And it worked extraordinarily well. In the sense of within, we also attracted international volunteers from all over the place. So we slowly, over the course of 18 months, pretty well renovated the whole building. So we had a school for children with profound disabilities, which was residential as well. We had a halfway house for post-institutionalized young adults. We had a computer training centre for adults with physical disabilities so that we could get them back into work. What they call a socio-medical cabinet, which provided support for the Roma families that we were living with in the area.
Was that before the charity was born? Casa Ioana? How do I pronounce that?
Casa Ioana.
Casa Ioana. I was getting Angela's name because it's Nick Wara, even though it's pronounced Nickawara.
Exactly.
But it's Nick Wara, you've got to pronounce it. So it's Casa Wawona. Ioana. All right, Casa Ioana. Okay, so was that before Casa Ioana was birthed?
No, that was after Casa Ioana was born.
Okay. And then in 1997, you was approached by the mayor of Bucharest with a request to do what?
Well, he wanted me to open the country's first emergency night shelter for older homeless men. And I was a bit surprised because I had no experience with homelessness. And Médecins Sans Frontières were actually working here, and they were running various projects for homeless people. So I suggested that he actually speak with Médecins Sans Frontières and ask them. But he wanted a Romanian NGO to do it, a Romanian charity, and he particularly wanted me. And he offered us another building. So he dangled the carrot in front of me, and I said, okay, leave it with me for a little while and I'll try and see what I can do. But, I mean, this is back in the days where, you know, internet was in its infancy, so you couldn't just Google what's a night shelter or anything else like that.
Yeah.
So I was struggling to find, I mean, okay, we all have ideas of what a night shelter should be, but whether it was ever going to meet the needs of the people we were going to serve was another thing. So, and I wanted to make sure that happened. So together with my assistant, we actually started meeting up with homeless guys around the Gara de Nord, the North Station in Bucharest, and various parks where they used to congregate. And over the course of a few weeks, we managed to get 20 guys together who would meet regularly, and we would meet them in parks or whatever, bring coffee and cigarettes and whatever. And then slowly but surely we started talking about this night shelter.
Tell me a bit more about the state of the homelessness situation itself. Around about the time that you was asked to open up this shelter, what was homelessness like, and what was the client group like that you were going to be taking in?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, even today, there is no real data. There's been 2 or 3 researches carried out. So this Médecins Sans Frontières, when they were there, they kind of estimated that the homeless population in Bucharest, which is the capital city of Romania, was around 5,000. Whether that was true or not, I have no idea. I mean, because quite literally, homeless people don't count. I mean, they don't vote, they don't get called in censuses and so on. So, but it was significant, and rough sleeping was an issue in the sense of it was quite visible. So the other thing with it was that we were told older homeless men, so it had to be for them. Then when we started doing the research, we had data from what they call the Legal Medicine Institute here, which collects all the data from postmortems in Bucharest. And in those days, they collected data on people who were unidentified or who were obviously living rough. So we were able to find out that the winter before, about 350 people had died on the streets, not all through hypothermia, but trauma and various other things. And the average age of death was around about 52. So for us, when we were looking at older homeless men, we were thinking of something like 60 plus or 65 retirement age, when of course that was way out. So, I mean, we reduced it down to, I think it was 45 and over. So that was the sort of demography of homelessness in those days. Large amounts of numbers of homeless people and no homeless services, absolutely none at all at that time, except for what Médecins Sans Frontières were doing, which was giving the opportunity to have a shower and a meal.
Yeah.
So it was all very new stuff. But I mean, when we started looking at the night shelter, I mean, I kind of, when we sat down with our client group and discussed it, and they're saying, well, what's the night shelter? I said, I have no idea. That's why I got you. You guys are here to tell me what a night shelter is, because you got the lived experience and you're going to know what you're going to need. So we actually sat down and worked it all out. They made the rules. They kind of said what they wanted and how they wanted it equipped. and they moved into this new building, and we cleaned it all out. It was a total wreck. It was a former fruit and vegetable shop.
Are you there, Ian? I'm losing you. Just stand by with us a minute. We'll try and get him back as quickly as we can. We don't like silence on the radio, so while we try to get Ian back, just bear with me a minute. And what I'll probably do is I may well just do this. And what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to call him back into the call, and so just bear with me. We haven't even been going an hour yet. But, yep, we're trying to connect. Let's do this. And see what happens as we make this call, and we try and get Ian back. And I'm just talking to myself. Talk to me. You can hear it ringing even as I speak, really, but this is really such an intriguing story. I don't want to lose any of it. So just bear with me as I continue to try to get him out, or get him back. And that's what happens when you only have one guest on the show. It means that if you lose one, you've actually got nobody else to talk to. So we just put that in there, and not getting it at all. Hello,
Sorry,
Ian.
Kevin.
That's okay, mate. We've got you back. I've just kept on babbling until we can get you back. Sorry, we
Okay.
we lost ourselves right in the middle of that. Just come back in where you were, my friend.
So where did I fade out?
You were talking about the men and
and responsibility.
Yeah, that's right. That's where we were.
Okay. So I kind of said, okay, we'll pay them a salary and they'll be responsible for supervising the place. But the whole essence was that the shelter itself was theirs. So we would pay the bills, but they had to manage it. It was their project. It wasn't ours. We were just the neighbours. And that was it. I mean, as I said, they made the rules and everything else. The mayor came on the opening day and kind of looked around and said, well, where's the staff? So I pointed out the two supervisors, and he said, but they're homeless people. And I said, well, who better to assist homeless people than those with lived experience? I mean, it's obvious. Well, it was certainly obvious to me. Not obvious to him. He called me crazy again, so, well, there you go. And said everything would be stolen in the morning. Well, in fact, of course, it wasn't. When I arrived there in the morning, everything was clean. They cleaned the place, they cleaned up after breakfast, and everything was hunky-dory. So I had no hesitation whatsoever that leaving the night shelter that night to go home and to come back in the following morning. I had no apprehensions that anything would go amiss. And today we've kept that same philosophy with everything that we have. It's the beneficiaries, as we call them. They are responsible to manage their accommodation, and they do so. And out of normal office hours, there's no member of staff.
It says here, just after a few years, you noticed that there was a large number of women who started to look for a place with their children. So, I mean, for me, here in the UK, we've witnessed the very same sort of transitioning in homelessness, where most of the focus initially was on homeless men, especially older. And again, I'm not much younger than you, a little bit, but I was born in 1961, and when I was growing up, I can remember the Salvation Army as the only kind of service that was available. But excuse me, that was mainly for seafarers, seamen, who had lost touch with their families when they came back from sea, and you know, and they would stay there. And when I started working for the Salvation Army back in 2008, 2009, We still had many residents who had been in the Salvation Army for 40 or 50 years or more, who had come back from sea, and their families moved away, and their wives got married to someone else, and etc.
Sure.
And Salvation Army became their home. And it was only in around about 2010 that the local authorities started to move the goalpost and basically start to insist that these long terms be shipped out to care homes, the older ones anyway. And anybody that had been there for any length of time now needed to be found somewhere else to live, because they were no longer continuing to support this long stay in these homeless hostels. And they now brought about this new 3-month turnaround package where homeless people had to be found somewhere new to live within 3 months of entering the service. But there was still no service for women, and there was no service for women with children. So how did that get brought to your attention in the midst of, because I think every country had a very similar pattern where homelessness was only seen as a man thing, a male thing.
Yep, that's right. So, I mean, so as it was for the first year, 2 years maybe, and then, in fact, what happened before that was we suddenly started having a spike in older people becoming homeless, who were losing their apartments through fraud. So they were thinking that they were signing a rental contract. In fact, what they were doing was selling their property for the price of 1 month's rent. And they were just being literally chucked out of their own homes. The police weren't going to do anything. They had no money to pay lawyers, and nobody was interested in them. And they became homeless and started coming into Casuarina. I mean, we even had a retired university professor who had been made homeless in his 90s with his wife. It was just awful. And then after that, then started the big increase in women. And it just coincided, we were given another building in 2000, a much bigger place, in another part of the city. So originally it was an overflow shelter as well. I mean, it was just basically men. And then we started having the issue with women. So to accommodate women as well, I just simply built a wall in between the two parts of the building, and said, okay, men on one side, women on the other side, and appointed supervisors from the women's side, and they had supervisors from the men's side, and went home at night at 10 o'clock and said, see you in the morning. And it worked. I mean, everything worked. And then around about 2000, I guess, 2005, we started having families becoming homeless. And the situation with them was that they were going to the local authorities asking for sheltered accommodation. And the local authorities were offering the parents emergency night shelter on condition that the children went into local authority care. But when we heard that, we said, no, this is crazy. You can't split up a family when it's most vulnerable. And we'll take them in. So we then built inside the shelter what we call the family rooms, where families could stay with their children in a room. And then it was just an explosion after that. Once we started accepting families, invariably they were single-parent families, mother-led, but often they were also two-parent families. Once we started offering them space, they just came out of the woodwork. I mean, it was just extraordinary, a mass explosion of family homelessness.
Wow. So, how difficult was it to actually start finding places for children and their families? Because that's actually got to be a difficult, to locate, to put them all together and keep them all together.
Yep, no, it was. So at that time, hello?
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right, okay, sorry. At that time, there were very, very, very few services, particularly for families. So they became a priority group to us because they were so vulnerable. So it was how we were going to work with them. By that stage, we had actually moved away from doing emergency night shelter. And I'd already invested in a couple of social workers and a psychologist to actually try and get our beneficiaries back into work, because it was the only way out of poverty, and then eventually back into their own apartments. So we'd been working on this, what we call the ICASA or home program, for a while by that stage. The only way we could accept children officially, legally, was that if they were the responsibility of their parents. So in many respects, the local authorities just turned a blind eye to us. I mean, it was under-regulated in those days. They knew what we were doing. Obviously, they saw what we were doing as being very valuable. And I mean, they were our biggest referral agency. I mean, everyone was being referred to us by the local authorities, and there's 6 districts in Bucharest, and they were all sending these cases to us to be resolved, because there was literally no services for them.
So, how did you get the support to house them? Because again, as I said, it's very difficult to find housing or places for an individual, but for whole families, and as they start coming in their multiples, the odds,
Yep.
you know, were you funded by the local authority?
No, not at all. We received no financial assistance whatsoever. Everything we all that budget had to be found by local businesses and individuals and small fundraising events. So we were limited with a lack of proper finance to really do very much, except to make the place as comfortable as we possibly could. But the real issue with women and children, the parents and the families, was how do you house them afterwards? I mean, where do they go once they leave Casuana? And this is our biggest issue, because even today, homeless people are not a priority group for social housing, believe it or not.
No, they're not.
No, they're not. So, I mean, back in 1990, 67% of housing in Romania was public, so social housing, affordable housing. Now it's, I think, 1.7%. So it's a huge drop. The government had a massive sell-off of all the apartments and their houses and whatever in their possession, and they sold them cheaply to the sitting tenants, who became owner-occupiers, but became very poor owner-occupiers. So the only way for our guys is to earn enough money to be able to afford rental accommodation, and that's what we work for.
So, in this time, while you was seeing this thing staring up at you, and obviously you wouldn't have been committed if you didn't feel compassion for those that were actually struggling in this area. Where were you finding the strength to keep on pushing through, to find places or to support these individuals? Where was you drawing your strength from?
Actually, that was from the people I was working with, my staff team and the people I was working with. So it was a very, very supportive community, and I use the word community because that's what it was. I mean, it became a community of people working together to try and resolve the issues that we each faced. And I was just doggedly not going to give up. I mean, it certainly wasn't easy setting up these projects. There was little government support. Homeless people here in Romania are still regarded as people who deserve what they got, because in many ways they didn't look after themselves properly, or did something which caused their homelessness, which is, as we know, totally ridiculous.
And that continues to be the common view, though, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely right. So, I mean, they're referred to as, the slang expression is bush people, after a case where a homeless person was found dead under a bush, quite literally in the middle of the winter, and this nickname came up. So they were also quite brutalised by the police, who had really no time for them and wanted them moved on all the time. Homeless people are moved away from the centre pretty well all the time because they don't want the tourists to see them and so on. I mean, at the NATO conference a few years back, they literally bussed all the homeless people and just dumped them several miles outside of Bucharest. They just made their own way back in the next 2 days whilst the NATO conference was on. And they did that with the stray dogs as well. They just rounded them up and took them outside of Bucharest as well. So here you are trying to set up a project and get funding for a project for a group of people who really were ignored. And I mean, we often talk about homeless people being invisible people, but I mean, there would be no way that somebody would give a coin to a homeless person here begging in those days. I mean, it was just taboo. Everyone thought. I mean, we did a survey many years ago at that time, and we asked particular questions, and the vast majority of people wouldn't approach a homeless person because they thought that they would catch a disease or they would be assaulted or whatever. All these stereotypes. So, and it wasn't easy working with other Romanian NGOs either, because at that time, many NGOs saw themselves as competing for what little available funds there were. So partnerships were really not looked for. I mean, if you managed to get a donor, then you kept them secret, and that was it. And you worked singly with that donor. So there was very little sharing in those days. So it really was just keeping your head down and just working and producing the results. And that was the other thing that I kind of realised at the beginning was, if we were saying we're making a difference to these people's lives, then we had to show that we were. And how do you do that? I mean, how do you manage to show an increase in soft skills, for instance? I mean, we can say how many people have been in the night shelter, how long they stayed, where they went afterwards, etc., etc. But I mean, how do you determine how somebody's life has changed? Yeah. And we came across an outcome star, which was actually developed by St. Mungo's in London. So we adapted that for the Romanian side. And here we were very able to prove that we were making a considerable difference in people's lives. And with that sort of evidence, then we were going to go to the European Union and the Commission and getting funding, not a great deal of funding, but getting some funding to support our projects. And that, in that way, we were able to expand and increase the number of services that we were providing.
You know, you've kind of engaged with the homelessness of Romania, committed and impassioned to that. But did you go and see homelessness in its behaviour anywhere else apart from in Romania?
No, I mean, as a young policeman walking the streets of London, there were occasionally you saw somebody who was homeless, but I mean, my recollection is that there were not very many at all. But interestingly enough, when I was in the cadet school, I had to do a dissertation, and the subject that I was given a dissertation to do was on homelessness, believe it or not.
Wow.
So way back in 60, well, I guess it was 68, I did a dissertation on homelessness. But I mean, that was it. I mean, I had no other contact from there on. I mean, it was just research and that was it. So for it to come up later on in life was quite intriguing. But no, I mean, it was, just a short story. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I was invited by the president of Romania and was given a medal for my work with developing professional social services in Romania. And I was allowed to bring, I think it was 7 guests, or 5 guests. And Christina was touring India at the time, so she couldn't go. So I took my Romanian parents-in-law, my 2 social workers. That's right, there was six people. And I thought, who do I bring? I mean, I've got two other spaces. Who do I bring? And I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll take my oldest female beneficiary and my oldest male beneficiary. And all together, we went off to Cotroceni Palace, where the president lives, and for this big ceremony and award giving. And these 2 homeless people were introduced to the president of Romania, shook hands with him and spoke. But what was really interesting was Petre, who was the guy, was a lawyer who had had a breakdown. A very gifted guy, very intelligent. But he'd been writing nasty emails to the president, or letters to the president, for quite a while, berating him for his situation and whatever. So when I told Petre that I wanted him to go to the palace with me, it was on condition that he didn't upset the president, so he'd have to keep his mouth shut. And he agreed. But afterwards, we all went out for a meal to celebrate. Petre was quite quiet for a while, and then just came up and said, "You know what?" He said, "Ian, I've been thinking." He said, "Before I came to Casuana, I was a bum. I was a nobody. I was a vagabond. I went through dustbins and whatever. Then I came to Casuana." And he said, "Since I've been in Casuana, I've met Prince Charles, King Mihai and Queen Anna of Romania, the Abbot Pierre from France, the Vice President of the World Bank by that stage, and whatever, and many, many ambassadors." And he just sat back and looked at me and said, "I think that makes me pretty important." Yeah. And it was. I mean, it was classic. I mean, it's just amazing, absolutely amazing.
Here's the thing, not a lot of people get this. But even when I was growing up, my perception of a homelessness person was a grey bearded old man with an old rugged coat, drinking beer out of a brown paper bag, sitting or sleeping on a park bench.
Yep.
But when I engaged into the homelessness thing itself, and we'll come to only why afterwards, because I want to share that with you also, and I want to give you an opportunity to share that with yourself. But sooner or later, you began to find out that these were ordinary individuals from broken lives, broken families, made mistakes, no different than you and I. Somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's uncle. That person at some point in time mattered to somebody, if not still matters to the people that are looking for them. And the fact that they're homeless today doesn't mean that they weren't born homeless. They weren't born rugged. They weren't born living rough. It's just transitioned that way. And now what they need is to be loved and nurtured back to life and be reminded that they're actually worth something. And I found that once I
Absolutely
started
right.
working with them that way, I was able to take them much further. Now, what I wanted to go back to was I was able to identify that with them because of what I had been through myself. Did you find that the same for you?
Yes and no. I mean, there's no way that my experience didn't have some contribution um, to the work and the way I kind of worked with them. I always saw them as a bit of a cliche, I know now, but I mean, as a person-centered. So, I mean, if you put the person you're caring for in the center and listen to their needs, and just, I mean, for example, we have women come to us with kids who have just one almighty huge problem which they just cannot overcome. It's just too huge. And what we do as a team is sit down with that person and help chip away at that big problem until we got a series of small problems, very manageable, very easy to deal with, and we work out an action plan on how those issues can be put right. So, I mean, our holistic assessment is about 2.5, 3 hours long. So we work with them, with other agencies, to kind of, I mean, we say, where do you want to be in a year when you leave Castellana? Oh, I want my own apartment. Okay, bang. There's a star on the wall. Let's stick it up there. So how are you going to get there? How are you going to do this? I mean, what are the steps you need to do in order to do that? And we sit down and explore all the possibilities with them, look at the resources that are available and what resources are going to be needed in the future to help these actions go ahead. That's just project management for life, but you put it into some sort of sense and semblance, into logical steps, which people can quite easily understand and relate to. So this big insurmountable problem doesn't exist anymore. It's just little steps that need to be taken to resolve all these little issues. And that's the method of work that we've been using for a long, long while. And I only found that out simply by listening to them. I mean, it's just, I had no experience. I haven't been to university, I haven't been to college, I haven't been to do studies for homeless people or whatever. I was just thrown in with a bunch of homeless guys to get on with it and make what we could. So everything that's grown through Castellana to the present day is from them. It's been directly linked with them. Our progress has been their progress. Our triumphs have been their triumphs. Our failures have been their failures.
Absolutely.
It was all about working together to get people, as you say, to be loved again, to be respected, to get their dignity again. And if they're denied that, I mean, I quite often say, lots of people turn around and say that, yeah, there are some homeless people who choose to be homeless. Well, actually, I've got a very different take on that at all. I mean, in all the years I've been working with homeless people, I've never, ever yet met one person who has said to me, I've adopted this.
I've done this by choice.
Or I've adopted this lifestyle. The truth is that they see no hope, they see no opportunity, and all they have is despair. And what they do is adapt to living on the street. It's not adopting that way of life, it's adapting to that way of life. And once people are given the opportunity to be able to move on with their lives and given that support, then it's amazing how people change and how, I mean, to see somebody sitting in front of you crying and distraught and absolutely at their wits' end, walk out of your place 6-7 months later into an apartment and having a full-time job and good care for the children is extraordinary. I mean, it carries you. Of course it carries you. I mean, it's and it helps you over the bad days as well. I mean,
I remember doing a presentation for Barclays, and these were all directors and businessmen. And I did it at Barclays main headquarters in Coventry for the chief executive, managing directors, and etc. And it was based on the 3 steps of homelessness, as I called it back then. And I was trying to tell them the story from the point where you're a satisfied professional with a mortgage, a home, a family, and a job, and just giving them the 3 steps that can all go wrong, that leads them into that spiral cycle of homelessness. And it can all just start with losing a job, then not being able to maintain the payments on the mortgage that you've got. And in the meanwhile of all of that, your relationship is breaking down because you're now at each other's throats because the work stopped. There's not enough money coming in, and so you're arguing with each other every now and again. The marriage falls apart. The wife tells you to leave, and before you know it, you're already just that close to being on the streets. If you haven't got an additional financial bucket to sustain yourself in an individual flat. And how many people in today's society, if their wife was to say, I've had enough, this is too volatile, you're going to need to find somewhere else to stay, how many individuals are actually earning enough money to continue paying for the family home whilst paying for a new home of their own? That's almost an impossible situation to be in. So most of them end up in a hostel to start with, or a bed and breakfast, or a bedsit of some sort, which is totally alien to where they are. That leads them to depression. Now they're depressed, they need to go and get a bottle of something to suppress that depression, and before you know it, they've now started to drink heavily. They're no longer paying for the bed and breakfast or the bedsit that they're in, and they're going to get kicked out of that, and before you know it, they're on the street. And what could have been a problem with the family or the job that could have been turned around in days or weeks or months, 6 months to a year down the line, they're so far removed from that lifestyle. They're actually, pride won't let them turn back.
No, absolutely right.
They've also forgotten what it was like to be the person that they used to be.
Sure.
Now, most people tend to think that drug addicts and alcoholics become homeless. But in my research, what I've actually found is homeless people end up turning to drugs or alcohol in order for them to mask the pain or for them to be able to cope with the circumstances that they now find themselves living in. Is that very similar to what you found out there in Romania?
Yes, absolutely right. I mean, an important thing with homelessness, of course, is that being homeless is a state.
Yeah.
It's simply being a person without a home.
Yeah.
That's it. Full stop. It's a state. Homelessness is always takes time. It's a transitional thing, and during this life course of this particular person, they lose particular resources and whatever until eventually the last resource they lose is their friend's sofa, because they've been couch surfing amongst their friends. Even their friends are kind of saying, as enough's enough, you said you're going to stay through 4 months, kind of please move on. And then they suddenly find themselves sitting in a cafe drinking a cup of coffee, realizing they ain't got nowhere to go that night.
Yeah.
And it's largely the majority of our guys have had relational breakdowns. So we also work with largely with women and children experiencing domestic abuse. So they have very limited support groups. So particularly with long-term abuse, because it's generally controlling behaviour. So you have the abuser systematically breaking down the social and family networks of their partner, so they don't have those resources, so they become totally dependent on the abuse. So they have very limited social support networks in the first place. So I think another big thing here is because there is just not enough services for homeless people, when people do become homeless, it's on the street, it's rough sleeping. So it's just straight out their door onto the street. So that's extraordinarily difficult. Research also shows that with most homelessness, it's temporary. There's a blip. People become homeless, eventually get picked up, helped, and get back into what we call normal.
And here's where I want to go. I mean, we're obviously around about just over the last half hour to go on this. And I told you that 2 hours would go very quickly, didn't I? But
True.
I don't want us to get to the end and not have covered this, because there's a lot of good work that you guys do in not just supporting homelessness people from their point of homelessness, but it's also helping them to restructure their lives and getting them back into some normal living, especially with some of the families that you work with. Talk to me about some of these projects that you work through, where to help women get jobs, etc., so they can afford their own places.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, social assistance is very small amounts of money. So there's a universal benefit that anybody can claim, which works out to about 40 euros a month. So you're not going to buy very much with 40 euros. All the other benefits, it depends on the local connection. As we know, capital cities attract people of low income because that's where the work is. There's a lot of rural poverty in Romania. We have just seen the statistics come out of Eurostats. So we have presently 51% of our children here at risk of poverty. We're the poorest country except for Bulgaria in the EU. So life is quite precarious to start with. So what we often find is that there's a paradox, because a lot of the general public will see homeless people as being lazy.
Yeah.
We've had mothers hold down 3 or 4 part-time jobs and still not get enough to be able to afford a place to live. So they're working around the clock and still not making enough money. Most of the work is informal, so it's on the black market, so they're not paying tax. The employers are not paying tax, which means that the employees don't pay tax. If they don't pay tax, they're outside of the social benefits system, and they're also outside the health insurance scheme. So they don't have any access to medical treatment. So they are extraordinarily vulnerable, and they're abused and used by these employers who employ them, often not paying them, having done a month's work and then just saying, sorry, we haven't got the money, you'll have to move on. So we discovered very, very early on that it was vitally important to have a full-term job with a workbook. Over here, it's like a formal contract, because that way you are included in the social protection scheme, or little of what it offers, but at least you remember. And importantly, you get healthcare cover. But it's more attractive to our beneficiaries to go informal work because it pays slightly higher. So a short-term gain is a long-term loss. So we have to sit down patiently with them and try and get them to understand what the economics really are. And once we can do that, once we get them into work, the next big major obstacle for them is childcare. So we've developed a huge network of childcare services that these children go to whilst their mum's at work, and we do after school as well. So mums know their children are being well looked after. They're in full-time employment, and we have a savings club. So they save with us so that when they do eventually decide that the time is right to move on, they have enough money to pay 3-6 months rent, and they got some money to pay the utility bills and to buy the odd little bits and pieces that are missing out of the apartment that they're renting. But life has normalised. Excitingly for us is that we've just won an award to a grant to develop our financial literacy training program. And we see financial literacy training not just about how to manage a family budget, but about having money in the first place. So we've written into this program an opportunity for our mothers to go back to school, adult education, to get their high school diploma. If they get a high school diploma, then they're open to technical training, so they can increase their job skills. The job market increases for them. And then we've identified with local employers what are the soft skills that they're looking for in their employees, prospective employees. and we've written workshops around those sort of areas to increase their soft skills in there. We've actually got representatives from companies, including HR companies, who are coming in to do career advice, help with CVs, help with interview techniques, job placements, a whole raft of things that the local business community have just bought into. I mean, it's just been an amazing support. And the idea is that if they write a CV and send it off, they're going to get an interview, because the CV is no BS, it's just to the point and it's a good CV. And if they get an interview, they're going to get the job because they've got the interview techniques, and they're going to be able to sell themselves properly. So instead of meeting barriers, we're removing those barriers, and we're making access to these things a lot easier. It's a really, really fun course. It's lively, it's funny, a lot of humour in it, a lot of role playing in it. But I mean, I was trying to explain to somebody the other day, okay, so we say we have around about 85% of our adult beneficiaries are, when they leave, in work and in their own accommodation. And for the level of pay that they're getting, I mean, it's extraordinary. But they've also got the other skills. They've also got the other resources to back that up and to compensate for a smaller wage, if you like. But it's so what happens to the 15% who don't? But they don't go back onto the street. We get them into another project or another NGO or with a local authority to try and help them. Or, I mean, if they go back to an abuser, we're not saying that that's a success. If they go back to a dysfunctional family, we're not saying that that's a success. So we're not including them in our success figures, although they're housed. But as we know, homelessness is not about housing. It's one element of all the issues that they face. I mean, there's lots of other things that need to be put into place as well. So by working systematically like that, we get these high results, success rates. So no, I mean, in fact, we had to do a report just the other day. In the last 10 years, we had 3 families who returned to us, having left. So that's a pretty remarkable.
That's kind of where I was hoping to go next. That was my next question to you. How often do you see people coming back to your service once you've actually, once they've exited, once you've got them through, once you've supported them? How many people do you see coming back through?
As I say, I mean, in the last 10 years, it was 3 families coming. What we do is we don't just continue the psychosocial support. So if they still want to meet with their psychologist or with their social worker, those services go on for as long as they're needed. So there's no, once they leave, it's not as if we cut the umbilical cord and that's it, they're on their way. If they need support, they're there. If they need some support later on, then they can come back and see us. So what we also find is that not so many people come back. So to even to visit or to contact us to say, this is what's happened in my life and whatever. And that used to worry me enormously. And for the first few months after they leave, they're coming back because they made friends with other beneficiaries in the refuge. So, and the children make friends with the other children. So that, as I say, there's this community. And on the peer relationship, yes, they stay in touch quite largely with each other. But for us, the providers, very little feedback ever comes back. And I happened to meet this woman who had been staying with us about 5 years before. And I just happened to walk into a hotel and she was a receptionist behind the hotel. And we instantly recognised each other and went over and spoke. And she was absolutely just amazing. She had found another guy who was really, really nice, got another child by him, and her life had absolutely turned around, and she was back with a good relationship with her parents again, and everything was really, really good. And I kind of said, well, I'm going to have to ask. I mean, why couldn't you just picked up the phone and just said, hi, Ian, this is what's happening in my life, whatever. And she just looked at me and she said, that was the darkest period of my life, and I never, ever want to go back there again. And that made a lot of sense and ticked quite a lot of boxes for me. And yes, I could understand that. I mean, I can see that having gone through that awful experience, the last thing you want to do is keep going back to it or being reminded of it. I mean,
absolutely.
Just move on with your life.
I mean, there are many people that I've worked with over the years that I wonder how they are. Are they still doing what it was that we set them up to be doing? But I'd hazard a guess that if they wasn't, we'd probably soon know about it, wouldn't we? Because they'd be resurfacing in those bad places that they used to be, because it's people normally return to their familiar surroundings. So I feel good when I haven't seen somebody for a long time, because to me that tells me that they're still going on to that same track. And I do relate to what you've just said, because I also went through those things. Unlike you, I wasn't a paid professional. I did many other things in my life, but I've sent you a link so you can read that later in your own time. I lived a pretty bad life and did some very terrible bad things. I was involved with the police, arrested and gone to prison on a few occasions, and I was at my last ebb. So when I went before a judge looking at 14 years, I begged for one last chance to turn my life around. I was 44 years old, and 14 years in jail at that time would have been the end of me,
Sure.
So I begged for one last chance, and I got it, and I grabbed it with both hands. And everything that I've been through, although I use my story, my life story, my testimony, so to speak, in order to encourage others, is not actually something that I want to remind myself of when I'm on my own. I'll only use it if I encounter somebody that's in a dark place, a terrible place, and they can't see a way out, and I want to say to them, look, if it can happen for me, it can happen for you. But I totally understand how these people feel when they don't want to be revisiting, or they don't want to be reminded, or they don't want to keep going back to, because it was the worst time of my life, and a lot of things happened back then that I don't actually want to be reminded of, because they're very painful. But,
exactly.
So when I don't see people that I've worked with, I'm pretty hopeful that they are in a much better place, and they've continued in that much better place, and they're striving on for better things. I've just actually had I had a guy that I supported for several years, and I haven't seen him for about 4 or 5 years now. And it was only about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he popped up on inbox private messaging on Facebook and sent me a video. He's currently on holiday in Thailand, and far from anybody else thinking that he's back on drugs and everything else, he's actually carried on doing what we set out for him to do. And this is him continuing to enjoy his life and live his life on a whole new level. And this is the latest of the many holidays that he's had since he started working. So, not that I was worried about him, I just hadn't heard from him, but he just sent me a video and then said, hey, I'm in Thailand at the moment. And I was like, oh, wow, well, there you go. And I think that's the joy, the satisfaction of the work that we do, is just to know that the people that we've helped are still on that path that we put them on.
Oh, absolutely right.
Now, something else kind of constantly pops up as I keep reading these articles that I'm seeing about you, is just what a control freak you are. There's a lot of people that say things like, he just likes to do things himself, or including painting and cleaning the toilets, Ian.
Yes, so I have this wonderful rank of president of Casuana, and as I quite often remind everybody, including my staff, I clean the toilets, I wash the dishes, I drive the car, because we only have my car, and whatever. So, and paint and hands-on and whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, I've been a volunteer all these years, so I'm fortunate enough to have a good police pension, and that's sustained me. And of course, Christina's working as well, so we have that salary. But I'm hands-on. I mean, it's that's where I like to be. I mean, we were actually given office space by an Italian-Romanian businesswoman many years ago, when we just had the shelter started, the big one with the families, and it was a prestigious, huge chalet in the centre of town, and it was all Italian furniture, brand new computers. I even had an office which was huge, with a door that opened onto a terrace with a table and chair and everything else out in the sunshine. I mean, it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And she was paying all the bills. And I survived 2 weeks before I said, I can't do it anymore. And I had to apologise to her, just say, and try and explain to her that I wasn't functioning. I was not with the people I was working with. I was not having kids running into the office asking me things and whatever, or mums or whatever. It was just, I was just totally divorced from everything. I mean, it was, the place was really, really nice, but it wasn't the atmosphere that I wanted to be working in. So we moved back into the refuge. So yeah, it's. I work in the same office space as my team. We all share the same office. It's a great working environment. It's open door. It's very open. It's very transparent. It's just the way it should be.
You know, I can hear the joy, the fun, the excitement, the passion, the commitment. All the right ingredients are there, but it also hasn't been plain sailing, because back in 1998, you guys were literally robbed of everything, wasn't you?
Yeah. So
take us through that.
Yeah, the original block, which we had refurbished. If you remember, I was talking about, we had the school for profoundly disabled children and so on, and the halfway house and everything else. So I was actually at the seaside, and my assistant phoned me up and said, go and watch the TV now. Go anywhere and watch the TV. And across all these TV channels was the block being literally ransacked by these 300 Roma families. And the police just stood on and just looked on. The press were there taking photographs. It was all over the newspapers, everything else. And by the time I got there, Roma mafia type family had taken control of the building. And I just pushed past and went in and looked around. And they had pretty well stolen everything. And what they hadn't stolen, they destroyed. So, and it was a total job as well, because all the copper piping that we had put into the building, all of that had been taken and sold to be sold. All the radiators, doors, door frames, windows, window frames, everything that could be moved got moved out. And I managed to persuade this group to leave the place and locked it up again. I then contacted the various other organisations that had been sharing this resource centre with us to try and explain to them what had happened and what we had in mind, and we wanted their support. And I was very bulldogish about it. I said, okay, we do it again. We just redo everything again. We're not going to give up. But reluctantly, it dawned on me that there was no way that my staff or any of the other NGOs, their staff, were willing to go back again. So the project unfortunately died, and that was it. But by that stage, we'd got the other night shelter, so we had that project. And I had already, I mean, it was Castellano's project as well. I mean, the resource centre, okay, the building was ours and we put a lot of resources into it and we had a small project there. But it really did belong to all the other charities, excuse me, that had set their own projects up there. So that sense of ownership was certainly shared. But the night shelter had become our baby. It was our project. We were solely responsible for that. So, yeah, it was very, very difficult to turn your back on a building, particularly for me, because I'd put so much of my life into that, so much resources into making it what it was. And it's where I also have found myself spiraling out of control, and the building sheltered me. And it was where I was reborn, effectively, because that's exactly what happened in the sense. I mean, my life has been in two very distinct chapters, my pre-Romanian life and my post-Romanian life. And I see Romanian as very much my home. I mean, Bucharest is the longest time I've spent living anywhere in my life. I mean, it's the longest period of time anywhere. And it has become my home. And and in many respects, I look at Romania as the country of my rebirth. So I have citizenship here. But I mean, then it was a question of look. I mean, I learned when I was going through my process of self-discovery and self-awareness and whatever. I also learned one big lesson in life, and that was to not worry about the things that you couldn't change. And there was no way I was going to change the situation in that building. I mean, what had been done was done, and just like everything else in life, it was just a question of, okay, so that door is closed. Let's look for another door, and let's move this on.
It's got to be almost destroying to think that the very sort of type of people that you would be helping would be the very ones that would come and strip the very things that you'd want to help them with.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it was very difficult. I mean, there's a significant number of Roma families and Roma single women that we accept into our program today. I mean, I hold no animosity to them at all. What I did learn was that there were two, what they called mafioso type families who had also occupied some of the other buildings. And they had, in time, just with this group of people up into a frenzy. And there's the building. I mean, we used to do, we had a project for them. We had a kindergarten for their kids and everything else. I mean, it was quite bizarre that they should turn the way they did, or be persuaded to turn the way they did. But yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a mob frenzy. Once it starts going, everyone gets drawn into it and gets involved. And it was a big issue. But at the end of the day, our project ceased to be a project for our beneficiaries, but provided some form of accommodation to more Roma families in the area. So if there was ever a light, that would have been it. I mean, the building simply changed purpose, and we moved on, and they moved on.
You know, again, we're probably 15 minutes away from the end. But when you do this kind of thing, it is so self-satisfying when you're giving of yourself. Because the greatest gift to me, the greatest gift you can give is of yourself. And to do this type of work, you've got to give of yourself in order for this to really work. And there's no pay, it's all voluntary, and you keep on giving. So at some point when you're acknowledged, recognized, rewarded or awarded for the work that you love doing, It must be an absolutely tremendous feeling. And in 2002, Ian Tilling, you was honoured with an MBE from Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, an amazing experience. So, yes, it came very, very unexpectedly. And it was just absolutely amazing experience to go to the palace and have.
But take me before that, because apparently Prince Charles came to visit first.
Yes, he did. So that was quite an interesting one, because I'd heard through the embassy that he was making his first official visit to Romania. In fact, his second official visit is coming up in the next couple of weeks. But he's got a project over here and comes over quite regularly. But so I had the advance party that came over to look at the place and to interview me. And I recognised one of them, and somebody else in the team recognised me. And it turned out that I'd worked with three of these guys, and here they were, the advance party for Prince Charles, to make sure the project was okay and I was okay and everything was going to be all right. So I had a bit of advance warning this visit was going to take place, I suppose, because it was great times, reminiscing and everything else. But he came over and actually said, "I will visit when it's convenient to you. So forget my schedule. What's your schedule, and I'll fit in with you." And we said, well, obviously it's a night shelter, so we'll be working at full stretch at about 8 o'clock in the evening. So he said, okay, I'll come visit at 8 o'clock. And he had a dinner with the president, I think it was for 9 o'clock the same evening. So we knew he was about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour with us. And he just, he asked very pertinent questions of the beneficiaries we had. They were happy to chat with him. And it was a fabulous atmosphere. And he was really, really interested. So much so that he extended his visit. And he didn't leave until 9:15. So, he spent an hour and a quarter with us. And just... it just sat on beds and just talked to homeless people and through a translator. It was extraordinary, frankly. First time I'd actually seen him in action in the flesh, but he was very, very interested and spent the time with us. And we kind of...
I suppose you could tell that it wasn't a photo shoot. It wasn't... this was a real genuine...
Yeah, no, absolutely right. In fact, the one of the last photos I've got is him wagging his finger in front of my face saying, "When you're next in London, please call me."
Wow. And so then you were invited to London to the palace.
Yes. So, yeah,
and did the Queen say anything to you about the?
Yes, in fact. She mentioned that Prince Charles had mentioned me to her over breakfast after his visit to Romania. So he was clearly impressed with the night shelter. So she had that sort of personal insight. But no, very warm. Again, I was one of several, tens of people who were being invested at that particular time. And of course, she's got an equity who kind of whispers in her ear who it is and generally what it's about.
And then time to move on now to the next one.
Absolutely, yes, exactly. But she took her time and asked some very good questions and was very happy to listen. So I didn't exactly time it, but I think I probably had one of the longest slots of anybody there that day. So.
It must have been an amazing feeling for you, though.
Oh, absolutely. The anecdote that I like more than anything else is that getting out of the... my parents came with me, Christina and my children, and we all went for a meal afterwards. But I was, when we got out the station at Victoria, jumped into a taxi and just said very nicely with a big broad smile, "The palace, please."
Wow.
So it's not often you get a chance to do that. So, no, my parents were immensely proud, and it was an amazing day.
And then they always say that you're never really recognised for the things that you do at home, and it's always people that are abroad that see what you're doing. So you get the MBE from the Queen, go to Buckingham Palace, receive that, and then 2 years later, Romania themselves recognise your work for the city.
Yeah, which is the story I mentioned earlier with Petre, our lawyer, broken lawyer. So, yeah, that was an amazing experience as well. I mean, it was to be able to go there with a couple of homeless guys and to introduce them to the president of Romania, for him to ask some questions about their lives was something quite extraordinary.
Absolutely, and for you to see what it meant to them, that they actually mattered in that moment. They mattered more than anything else on the planet.
No, absolutely right. I mean, it was just, I mean, there's, great moments.
Well, Ian Tilling, MBE, achiever of great things. You're not getting any younger. Time waits for no one. So after all this fantastic work that you've done, there obviously is coming a time where you've got to start thinking about handing over the reins or the baton.
Actually, I'm in no hurry to do that. So I thoroughly enjoy life too much, and I am certainly not the person to sit down in front of a TV or spend my days drinking tea and whatever. So no, I'm still very active and will remain so. But I do have somebody in mind who I would like to see take over the organisation. So, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that happens. But I've built up a very good board of administration or trustees here. So I've answered the question, what happens if Ian Tilling doesn't go to work anymore? So I'm happy that the legacy is there and it's going to continue. And we are looking at expanding as well. So, I'm very happy. I mean, all the time I have a role to play and I can do that reasonably well, then I should be involved. When they start, telling me to move on, I shall then look at it again.
Well, just before we go, Ian, what could somebody do if they wanted to get involved in an organisation like yours? What should they do? How would they go about it?
Well, I suppose the easiest way would be to look us up on the internet and to make contact with us there. I mean, our email addresses and my telephone number and whatever is there, and move it that way. I mean, certainly we're always looking at people to help us raise funds. I mean, that's one of the significant areas in which we need help. But I mean, to share experience as well. I mean, we're always willing to work with other homeless organisations to share experience. We haven't got all the answers, and we're always thirsty for more knowledge. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at trying to join up with a UK domestic abuse organisation to look at ways that we can train the Romanian police on how to deal with domestic violence cases. So looking for partners there. So there's lots of ways. I mean, we will consider pretty well everything. I mean, I think with volunteering or with working with organisations in partnerships and everything else, it's a two-way street. So I've always said to our volunteers, don't do it unless you're going to enjoy it. Yeah. Because it's pointless. It's absolutely. I mean, you've got to get something out of it. I mean, clearly you and I get a great deal and get a great buzz out of what we do, And our staff teams and our volunteers similarly get a great kick out of it. So they're taking something home themselves as well as giving of themselves.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Ian, it's been an absolutely amazing 2 hours talking to you. And again, as I said to you, 2 hours would fly by. We didn't need any music whatsoever. But here
Exactly.
on Issues Today, on World Jam Global Radio, we take our hat off to you. It's been an absolute honour and a pleasure to share this time with you and to hear about the amazing and fantastic work that you're doing out there in Romania. And maybe we will catch up again in the near future when there's new projects or different things taking place.
Sure.
And you can keep us updated on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio on ways and means that people can go around supporting the work, the great work that you do. But for now, in the meantime, Ian Tilling, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. And we wish you well, and all your volunteers. We wish you the greatest success with all the blessing of God and go with His grace, that you may continue to do some great work and impact some more amazing people.
Many thanks, Kervin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll catch up real soon.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity. Clarity.
Well, just in case you didn't get all that,
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Casaiona, spelt C-A-S-A
I already did my
I-O-A-N-A, can be found on the website, on the good old internet,
I already did my time.
and his name is Ian Tilling. Look him up. Doing some great work in Bucharest.
Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about
Now don't forget you can join us again
do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet.
Don't forget the shows to look forward to on the 8th of April. Witch Child with Mike Ormsby and Susie Howe.
Now things have changed.
Who Speaks for Me on the 15th of April
I'm a
with Taylor Novell.
no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
You can find a repeat recording of this show
My time.
available on YouTube, on Issues Today, on World Jam Global Radio's site,
I was a drug dealer.
probably in about half an hour or so.
Never got home. I
Just in case you missed any of it,
what I had.
or you just want to hear it again, or you want to share it with friends.
I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
Homeless in Romania.
And thinking, oh,
An amazing story of
the life I used to live, I wouldn't do it.
how a former police detective
Brain was so numb, I was a real Forrest Gump.
went and rediscovered himself
Me and Billy the Kid,
and made a positive impact on the life of others.
a much meaner.
Absolutely amazing story.
I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Already did.
As for me, I'm going to be back with you tomorrow morning on my Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel Show. You'll catch me live from 8 until 10.
Already did my time. Paid for my crime. Already did my
But from now until then,
Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime.
I'm out of here.
Pay for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm I'm a changed man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster, life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already